about their investigation into the deaths of the actor Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakawa. They say he died from heart disease after his wife passed away from a rare.
40 feet below a dead actor's library, an FBI flashlight lands on an iron door with no handle, no hinges, just welds. Someone sealed it from the inside decades ago and never came back out. What the Bureau pulled from that darkness will rewrite 30 years of Hollywood history. February 26, 2025. Just after 11 in the morning, a small convoy of federal vehicles rolled up to heavy steel gates hidden deep in the piñon forests outside Santa Fe, New Mexico. Behind those gates sat a $4 million compound, the private estate of Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman and his wife, classical pianist Betsy Arakawa. Nobody had seen or heard from them in days. Phone calls went unanswered. Staff were turned away. Complete silence came from a property that usually ran with the order of a small military base. It was not family, a friend, or police who finally raised the alarm. It was a handyman. He told deputies he believed the couple had died inside. The gates had to be forced. Locks had to be cut. That detail alone told the agents something was wrong. This was not a place where someone left a door open by accident. Everything about the compound was built to stay sealed unless someone inside chose to open it. When officers finally crossed the threshold, they expected something sad but normal. Two elderly people passing quietly on their own. That is not what they found. The bodies of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa were inside the mansion, along with the body of their dog. Investigators later confirmed Betsy had died about a week before Gene. Her cause of death was listed as a severe viral infection. His was heart failure with other factors. Natural causes, case closed on paper. But the scene did not match the paperwork, not even close. The contradiction no one wants to explain. Here is where the whole story starts to crack. The Santa Fe Sheriff's Office told the public on day one there were no signs of foul play. That is the usual line, meant to stop a story before it grows. But in the very same statement, they admitted the scene was suspicious enough to need a full forensic search of the whole property. Stop and read that again. No foul play, yet suspicious enough to bring in federal teams with thermal cameras and forensic experts. Those two statements do not fit in the same room. That contradiction is exactly where the story cracks open. The timeline itself raises questions nobody has answered in public. Betsy died a full 7 days before Gene. That means Gene Hackman, a 95-year-old man, was alive in that house with his dead wife for up to a week. No call for help. No message to anyone outside. Not one word from a man who, just weeks earlier, could still hold a full conversation. What keeps a man silent for 7 days in a house with a loved one's body? Fear. Duty. Grief so deep it locks the throat. Or the knowledge that calling for help would mean letting strangers inside, and strangers would find what was underneath. Before we go further, one thing has to be said plainly. If even half of what investigators documented beneath this estate is true, this becomes one of the most disturbing finds ever linked to a celebrity death in modern American history. Sources have obtained the official search warrant. What authorities documented inside that property goes far, far beyond a death investigation. Because hidden behind a wall in Hackman's private library, federal agents found something none of the staff, the neighbors, or local police ever knew was there. A tunnel sealed for decades. And whatever was locked inside, someone had worked hard to make sure it stayed buried forever. But the tunnel was not the worst part. The worst part was what was already waiting at the bottom. The fortress on the hill. To understand what the Bureau walked into underground, you first have to understand what stood above it. Gene Hackman's estate was not a home in any normal sense. It was a fortress. Thick forest hugged every side. Tall stone walls ran the perimeter. Motion sensors sat at every entry. Thermal cameras. A 24-hour security grid whose skill reportedly matched the perimeter of certain government black sites. Staff were hand-picked, deeply checked, and signed papers so tight that not one of them has ever spoken publicly about what happened inside those walls. Think about that for a second. Decades of workers, gardeners, housekeepers, personal chefs, maintenance crews, private security, and not one leak. Not one anonymous quote. In the age of social media, where janitors post pictures of celebrity trash cans for likes, that kind of silence does not happen by accident. It is enforced. Local reporters who tried to dig into the property's history hit the same wall every time. Building permit requests came back with whole sections blacked out. Property records had gaps no clerk could explain. One researcher from the Santa Fe Historical Society reportedly spent months pulling land records tied to the estate, then, without warning, stopped returning calls, never published a word. Nobody knows what she found, or who quietly told her to stop looking. Step past those gates, though, and the inside was stunning. Hallways lined with original master paintings, furniture dating back centuries, once owned by European royalty, the story goes. Chandeliers rumored to have hung in the halls of ancient palaces. Gardens filled with rare plants that exist in fewer than a dozen known spots on Earth. Dr. Elena Vasquez, an architectural historian at the University of New Mexico, who later helped with the property review, put it in words that landed hard. I have documented estates all over the Southwest. This one was designed like a museum built inside a military compound. The beauty was real, but so were the countermeasures. That mix does not happen unless someone is protecting something very specific. Body cam footage was released only after a rare public ruling from a New Mexico judge. It shows deputies moving through the mansion hours after the discovery. The audio is quiet and heavy right away, but what troubled the agents most was not the quiet. It was the proof that someone had been busy inside the house in the hours or days before officers arrived. Furniture dragged across hardwood floors, books pulled from shelves and restacked in the wrong order, drawers left open, a bedroom safe standing open and completely empty. Someone had been tearing through this house, either searching for something or hiding it. Then agents walked into the library, and everything about the case changed. Behind a specific section of wall in Hackman's private library, an entrance was hidden so well that a person could stand in that room 1,000 times and never see it. Agents found a hidden mechanism, not a bookcase on a hinge, not a latch behind a painting. This was an engineered opening that needed a specific sequence to unlock. Whoever built it wanted it invisible to anyone who did not already know exactly where and how to look. Behind the mechanism, a narrow passage opened. Stone steps dropped into total blackness. No light source, no clear airflow. Just the throat of carved stone going straight down into the earth beneath the property. The agents went down. The temperature fell with every step. The air grew damp and metallic, carrying the taste of rust and something older. Drops of water clung to the walls. Their flashlights swept across the stone, and that was when the first wave of dread hit. The walls were covered in markings. Not graffiti, not decoration. Sharp inscriptions carved with tools and purpose. Some looked like alchemical symbols, others looked like blueprints for machines that should not have existed in the era the tunnel was built. One section of wall showed what looked like a plan for a machine with no modern match. Gears, chambers, conduits arranged in ways one forensic technician later described in his notes as engineering from nowhere. The construction itself told a story. Near the library entrance, the stonework was clean, mid-20th century work. Industrial materials, poured concrete support, straight machine-cut edges. But the deeper the agents went, the rougher the walls became. Hand-carved joints, primitive support, tool marks that fit pick and chisel work, not power tools. Marcus Devlin, a structural engineer who reviewed leaked photos of the passage for his own review, estimated the deepest parts could be over 100 years old, possibly much older. This was not built by the homeowner. The upper section was renewed and strengthened, but the core of this tunnel was already here. Hackman moved into it. He inherited it. Then they reached the chamber, a huge underground space frozen in time. Old wooden crates stacked against the walls. Some had collapsed with age, spilling their contents across the stone floor. Yellowed papers, rusted metal objects, artifacts that did not fit any known time or place. One agent lifted the lid of a dusty box and found photographs, fragile, curling at the edges. Faces no one recognized, dressed in clothing from a century ago. Some photos showed what looked like secret meetings in windowless rooms. Others showed places, buildings, underground spaces that do not match any known location on record. In one image, a group of men stood around a table covered in maps. Their faces were tense. A single bulb above cast hard shadows. On the back, someone had written a date in careful ink. 1937. And beside it, a single word in a language no one has identified. Leather-bound files sat next to the photos, filled with coded dates, redacted names, and passages about events that seemed to have been wiped from the historical record. Some pages had been partly burned. Someone tried to destroy them, then either stopped or got interrupted. Other papers had watermarks and seals linked to groups that were officially shut down decades ago. The sheer volume was overwhelming. Agents estimated that fully sorting what was in that chamber could take years, maybe a decade of careful work by a team of specialists working in shifts. Some paper was so fragile it fell apart the moment a gloved hand touched it. Other pages, sealed inside oiled leather folders, looked like they had been written the week before. The gap in how well things were kept suggested whoever last came down knew which items were expendable and which were not. Among the items recovered were 3 separate ledgers written in a mix of Latin, French, and an unknown script that linguists have so far refused to describe in public. There were maps showing the American Southwest with borders and settlements that do not match any known historical era. There were sealed glass vials, contents unknown, packed in straw. There were also, according to one leaked evidence log, 2 objects described only as instrument unidentified, do not open. But here is the part nobody was ready for. The photos, the papers, the crates, all that was only disturbing. What waited at the back of the chamber, behind everything else, was something on a different level. The door that does not open. Deep in the far wall of the chamber, past the crates and the scattered files, the agent's flashlights found it. An iron door set flush into the stone. No handle on the outside, no hinges in sight. just a rusted steel surface with weld marks running along every seam. Someone had sealed this door from the inside and made absolutely sure it stayed sealed. The lock was not built to keep people out. It was built to keep something in. The FBI has said nothing publicly about what lies beyond that door. Not a word. No statement, no leak, no background briefing to a reporter. In a time when classified files show up on Discord servers and internal security footage hits social media within hours, that level of silence does not happen by accident. It takes active, steady cover-up. That tells you something important about what the Bureau is sitting on. Now here is where it gets stranger. The floor of the chamber was more than dusty stone. It was set with circular patterns, detailed, careful designs that, viewed from above, look like star maps. Charts carved into the ground by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Not random, not decoration. The patterns match specific star alignments, constellations, planet positions, and orbital paths, all laid out with a precision that would need advanced math and careful tools. Whoever carved them was not guessing. They were mapping something, or marking it for someone who would come later and know how to read it. The tools pulled from the crates were just as wrong. Markings that fit no known maker or time period. Inside workings so precise they would need building technology that did not exist when this tunnel was built. One device caught the eye of the experts. A palm-sized metal cylinder with turning rings inside, cast as a single piece with no visible seams or way to put it together. Even today's metalworking struggles to copy that kind of single-piece casting at that size. Dr. James Whitfield, a former FBI forensic analyst who spent 19 years working on classified evidence before retiring, looked at the public details and said something that has stayed with everyone who heard it. When an agency goes this quiet, this fast, it usually means one of two things. Either they found nothing and they are embarrassed, or they found something so important that the disclosure talk has moved above the team. I have seen both. This does not look like embarrassment. So which was Gene Hackman? A man collecting impossible artifacts? A guardian of knowledge someone decided should never see the light? Or did he inherit this underground world from someone whose weight simply became his? The answer might be hiding in the ground itself, and it might explain why he and Betsy never made it out of that house alive. Ground Zero, the land under Santa Fe. The ground beneath northern New Mexico is not what most people picture when they think of Santa Fe art galleries and desert sunsets. Los Alamos, the birthplace of the atomic bomb, sits just a short drive up the highway. The Manhattan Project, nuclear tests, black-budget weapons research. All of it happened within an easy drive of Hackman's front gate. For decades, locals have swapped stories about underground transport systems, forgotten bunkers carved into the mesas, and structures meant to shelter government leaders in case of civilizational collapse. Freedom of Information Act requests have quietly confirmed that large-scale underground work did happen in this area during the height of the Cold War. How large is still classified. But Richard Payne, a retired Department of Energy consultant who worked on facility reviews in northern New Mexico during the 1990s, gave a chilling summary in a recorded interview. There are systems under those mesas that were built to outlast the surface. Some of them were shut down. Some were sealed. Some were simply forgotten, cut off from every official map, every classified record. They just went dark. Here is the part that will not sit still. The iron door at the end of Hackman's tunnel was not decoration. The steel was military grade. The rivet spacing matched building methods used in high-security government sites built in the 1950s. If this had been a wine cellar or a root cellar, nobody builds it like a bank vault. If it was a forgotten branch of a much larger government network that quietly spread under the whole region, that changes the entire scale of what we are looking at. The neighbors always felt something was wrong. Margaret Calloway, who owned the property right next to the estate for 22 years, still remembers the sounds. Low rumbles at 2 or 3 in the morning. Not plumbing, not heating. She brought it up to Hackman once, casually, over the property line while trimming a hedge. He gave her a look. She says she still thinks about it at night, and said simply, "Some things are better left below the surface." She laughed it off back then. She does not laugh anymore. He first thought it was light seismic activity. He was a scientist. He wanted a scientist's answer. So he set up a portable seismometer one summer, just to prove to himself he was imagining it. The readings did not match any natural pattern. They were rhythmic, mechanical. Something was running down there on a schedule. He filed a formal noise complaint with the county in 2019. It was never followed up on. Others in the area remember unmarked trucks arriving after dark and leaving before dawn. Shadowy visitors, faces hidden. No invoices, no logos, no trace. Former staff who left the estate simply vanished from public life. Phones disconnected. Social media wiped, as if their lives had been quietly erased. One housekeeper who worked the property in the early 2000s told a close friend before her own disappearance that she had seen things in the house she was not supposed to see. She refused to say what. She was gone from the area within a month. Her forwarding address turned out to be a P.O. box in a town she had never lived in. Her sister, contacted years later by a documentary researcher, said the family received a single postcard from her in 2004 and nothing since. There is also the matter of the property's water use. A public utility records request filed by a local watchdog blog in 2021 showed the estate's water use had been steady and unexplained, higher than the size of the household could explain. Enough to run a small commercial operation below grade. Enough, in other words, to feed systems that no one on the surface had ever seen. The ghost line. Here is a detail that has barely made the news, but should stop everyone cold. During renovations that first opened the tunnel entrance, workers found a second communication system hardwired into the estate's walls. Not a phone line, not internet cable. A closed-circuit system that connected the main house straight to the underground chamber. Old wiring, decades older than modern phone service, but still working. Kept up. Alive right up until the day the Bureau walked in. Someone had kept this line alive for years, talking to whatever was down in that tunnel on a channel that could not be watched, recorded, or tapped. In a house already wired with top-of-the-line digital cameras, this system was completely off the grid. A ghost line running through the walls like a nervous system no one was meant to see. Who was on the other end? What was so important that it needed a channel invisible to the rest of the world? The silence. The official story is that Gene Hackman died of heart failure at 95. It sounds fine on paper, but the paperwork does not explain why a couple with access to some of the best private health care in the world shut themselves off so completely in their final days. No doctor calls, no emergency contacts, no staff on site. The outside alarm system stayed active, but the inside cameras had been turned off by hand. 2 people, alone in a fortress, dying in silence, with a sealed underground vault 40 feet below them. The link between the tunnel and the deaths is the strangest part of the case. Were they silenced because they knew too much? Did someone use the passage to sneak into the mansion? Or had something changed, something that made Hackman finally realize the thing he had been guarding his whole life was no longer safe? Now, here is the detail that haunts everyone who has touched this case. The tunnel entrance in the library was not sealed when agents found it. The mechanism had been used recently. Gene Hackman, a man in his mid-90s, had gone down into that cold, damp passage not long before he died. Why? What was he checking? What was he afraid of? Or, and this is the question no one wants to ask out loud, was he hiding from something he knew had finally found him? The warm man behind the fortress. Here is what people forget about Gene Hackman. Before he became a recluse, before the fortress and the silence, he was one of the warmest presences in American film. His barber in Santa Fe told a local reporter that Hackman would come in every few weeks, sit in the same chair, and talk about Hemingway novels and the Kansas weather he grew up with. He tipped double. He remembered every employee's kids by name. At the local farmers' market, vendors knew him by sight. He would buy green chilies in bulk and joke, self-deprecatingly, about his terrible Spanish. He gave to local literacy programs. He wrote quiet checks to a nearby animal shelter. He was not a man who chose isolation because he disliked people. He chose it because something made him feel he had to. Now that we know what was underneath his house, that choice carries a weight it never had before. From the French Connection to Enemy of the State, Hackman spent his career playing men trapped inside conspiracies they could not escape. Federal agents, Coppola's paranoid surveillance man in The Conversation. Reporters, investigators, whistleblowers. Men in the walls of systems bigger and older than they knew. Maybe none of that was just acting. Maybe he understood something the rest of us only ever watched from outside. What comes next? FBI forensic teams are reportedly still working below the property, studying every artifact, every document, every symbol carved into the walls. Trace DNA, invisible residue checks. Cryptographic decoding of messages left on paper that turns to dust when you touch it. They have brought in experts from fields that do not usually cross paths. Linguists, metallurgists, even astronomers quietly asked to read the star maps carved into the chamber floor. If those clues eventually lead to specific names, specific groups, specific historical events, this case does not just make news, it detonates. But the authorities will not say a word. Their statements are vague, sharp, clearly designed to reveal nothing useful. And that silence tells you more than any press conference ever could. Think about that for a second. We are months past the first discovery. In any normal investigation, something leaks. Early findings, unnamed sources, background chats with reporters over coffee. In this case, nothing. Zero. The information lockdown around that tunnel is tighter than anything around the deaths themselves. Which means whatever is down there is not just historically important, it is operationally sensitive. Someone, somewhere, made the call that the contents of that chamber are still dangerous enough today to justify total containment. Not in 1950, not during the Cold War. Today. The doors that were never meant to open. Beneath the mansions of the powerful. Beneath the forests, the mountains, the quiet towns we think we know. There are doors that were never meant to be opened. Gene Hackman guarded one of those doors for decades. He built his whole life around it. The walls, the cameras, the silence, the legal agreements, the vanishing staff, the total isolation. He carried that weight from the peak of his career to the final days of his life. He carried it through Oscars and press tours. He carried it into retirement, when he traded acting for painting and quiet novels. He carried it into the last cold week of his life, when he sat alone in his fortress with his wife's body and chose not to pick up the phone. And now he is gone. The last person who knew every corridor of that tunnel, every crate in that chamber, every mark on those walls. Gone. Whatever was behind that welded iron barrier 40 feet below his library is no longer his to protect. The question is not whether the FBI knows what is down there. They do. The question is, what could possibly be so dangerous, so destabilizing, so threatening to what we think we know about this world that they would rather say absolutely nothing than tell the public what they found behind that door? What do you think is behind it? Was Hackman the last guardian of something buried long before he was ever born? Or was he its final prisoner, serving a sentence he inherited the day he first turned the key? Drop your theory in the comments below, because I read every single one. And if you want to be here the moment the next piece of this story breaks, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Somewhere behind that iron door in the New Mexico desert, something is still waiting. It waited through wars, presidencies, and atomic tests. It waited under one of the most famous faces in American cinema for 30 years. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.